The sun was setting lazily over the hills of Oakridge, painting the sky with shades of orange and red that reflected in the windows of the imposing Bradford estate. Rachel observed the landscape through the window of the master bedroom, her hands unconsciously caressing her 6-month pregnant belly while trying to ignore the knot forming in her throat. The room, decorated with antique furniture and silk curtains, seemed suffocating on that summer afternoon. On the bedside table, a framed photograph showed a moment that now seemed to belong to another life. She and Nathan smiling in front of the estate, right after their wedding. Her eyes scanned the photograph, trying to find in that image some sign, some indication of what was to come. How had she not noticed the small details before? The way he held her arm too tightly, the smile that didn't reach his eyes, the controlling posture she had confused with protection. A cheerful bark interrupted her thoughts. Wolf, the German shepherd who had arrived at the estate as a puppy, entered the room wagging his tail. He was the only living being on that property who still showed genuine affection for her. Rachel smiled, stroking the dog's ears, finding comfort in his loyal presence. Wolf lay down at her feet, as if understanding her need for company. The sound of footsteps in the hallway made her heart race. She recognized that rhythm, that cadence she had learned to fear. Nathan entered the room without knocking, as he always did. His face, once considered charming and seductive, now carried a hardness that made her shudder. He stopped at the door, observing her with those cold eyes that seemed to calculate every movement. "We need to talk," he announced, his voice controlled, but carrying a tone she knew all too well. It was the same tone he used before his outbursts of anger, before the cutting comments that made her feel smaller, insignificant. Rachel nodded, trying to control the trembling in her hands. Wolf raised his head, alert to the tension that filled the room. The dog always seemed to sense when something was wrong, and at that moment his eyes didn't leave Nathan. "I found something interesting today," he continued, approaching with measured steps. "It seems someone has been poking around where they shouldn't." His fingers held a yellowed envelope, and Rachel felt her blood freeze. It was one of the documents she had found in the locked box, one of the letters that revealed the mystery behind the disappearance of Nathan's first wife. The silence that followed was deafening. Rachel could hear her own heart beating against her ribs, while her mind worked frantically seeking a way out. How had he discovered? She was sure she had left everything exactly as she had found it. I was just organizing the guest room," she tried to explain, her voice coming out weaker than she would have liked. "The box was locked," he cut in, his voice now charged with contained anger. "The box was locked, Rachel, and you forced the lock. Do you know what happens to people who don't respect boundaries?" Wolf stood up, a low growl escaping his throat. Nathan shot a look of contempt at the animal before turning his attention back to Rachel. His eyes now had a different gleam, something she had never seen before. It wasn't just anger, it was something deeper, more dangerous. "Let's go for a ride," he announced, not as an invitation, but as an order. "I need to show you something important." Rachel felt a shiver run down her spine. Through the window, she could see that the sky was already darkening, and heavy clouds were approaching from the horizon. A storm was coming, not just in the sky, but in her life. Something told her this would not be a simple car ride. As she stood up, her legs trembling slightly, Wolf positioned himself between her and Nathan as if trying to protect her. The dog had always been her silent guardian, and now more than ever she was grateful for his presence. "The dog stays," Nathan ordered, his voice leaving no room for argument. But Wolf had other plans. When Rachel began walking toward the door, he followed her, completely ignoring Nathan's order. The hallway of the house had never seemed so long, each step echoing against the old walls like a harbinger of what was to come. The staff who normally circulated around the house at that hour seemed to have disappeared, as if they knew it was better to keep away. If this story interests you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give a like. Tell us which city you're watching from. We continue. The pickup truck cut through the darkness of the dirt road, its headlights illuminating the winding path that led to the old bridge. The silence inside the vehicle was broken only by the sound of the engine and Nathan's heavy breathing, who kept his hands firmly on the steering wheel. Rachel observed her husband's profile, trying to decipher his thoughts, while her own mind screamed, "Danger alerts." Wolf was in the back seat, having jumped into the truck before Nathan could stop him. The dog kept his eyes fixed on the back of the rancher's neck, as if waiting for any suspicious movement. His presence was both a comfort and a concern for Rachel. She knew he would protect her, but she feared for the animal's safety. The clouds in the sky had become denser, and the first drops of rain began to fall on the windshield. The wind blew strongly through the trees, making them dance sinisterly in the headlights. Rachel knew this road. It was the one that led to the old bridge, an ancient construction that crossed the most powerful river in the region. "Do you know what's most interesting about those letters you found?" Nathan's voice cut through the silence, making Rachel instinctively shrink. "They tell only part of the story. There's much more you don't know, much more that nobody knows." A lightning flash illuminated the sky, revealing for an instant the cold smile forming on Nathan's lips. Rachel felt her baby move, as if it too sensed the danger surrounding them. Her hands instinctively protected her belly, a gesture that didn't go unnoticed by Nathan. "Did you really think we could have a happy ending?" he continued, his voice now loaded with bitterness. "That I would simply forget everything and we would start a new life with this baby? You're even more naive than she was." The indirect mention of his first wife made Rachel shudder. The letters she had found revealed a story of fear and desperation, written by a woman who gradually realized she was trapped in a dangerous web. The last letter, dated just a few days before her disappearance, contained a desperate plea for help that was never answered. The truck began to slow down as it approached the bridge. The river, swollen by recent rains, roared meters below, its dark waters reflecting the occasional flashes of lightning. Rachel felt her heart race even more when the vehicle came to a complete stop in the middle of the bridge. "Get out," Nathan ordered, already opening his own door. The sound of the rain intensified when he got out, his heavy steps echoing on the old structure of the bridge. Rachel remained motionless, her body refusing to obey. Through the rearview mirror, her eyes met Wolf's, who was now completely alert, muscles tense, ready to act. The dog emitted a low growl when Nathan circled the vehicle and violently opened the passenger door. "I said get out," he repeated, grabbing Rachel's arm with enough force to leave marks. The brutal touch made her let out a moan of pain, and it was enough for Wolf to take action. With a furious bark, the dog leaped from the back seat toward Nathan, who was forced to release Rachel to defend himself. The moment of distraction was all she needed. With a quick movement, Rachel managed to break free and open the door on the other side of the truck. The rain was now falling with full force, soaking her clothes in seconds. Her bare feet felt the cold metal of the bridge, while her mind worked frantically seeking an escape route. In front of her, the darkness of the road stretched for miles. Behind, the path back to the estate was blocked by Nathan, who was now fighting to push Wolf away. A scream of rage cut through the air when Nathan finally managed to push the dog away. Rachel watched in horror as he pulled something from his pocket, an object that gleamed sinisterly in the light of another lightning flash. Her body acted on instinct, moving in the only possible direction, toward the edge of the bridge. The world seemed to freeze for an instant when Rachel felt the emptiness beneath her feet. The rain punished her face as she fell, the cold night, air cutting her skin like razors. Nathan's scream mixed with the sound of the storm, but was quickly swallowed by the roar of the approaching waters. The impact with the river was brutal. The icy water enveloped her body like a deadly embrace, and for a moment, all orientation was lost in the liquid darkness. Her lungs burned, begging for air, while the current dragged her mercilessly. Through the murky water, Rachel could see the distorted lightning flashes, as if she were in another world. It was then that she felt something grab her dress. Her first instinct was to fight against whatever it was, but she soon recognized the touch. They weren't human hands, but the strong and gentle teeth of Wolf. The dog had jumped in after her, ignoring his own danger to save her. Her eyes met, the animals in the darkness of the waters, and in them she saw a fierce determination. With superhuman strength, Wolf swam against the current, pulling Rachel toward the shore. Each movement was a battle against the force of the river, which seemed determined to take them. The soaked dress and pregnancy belly made each stroke more difficult, but Rachel didn't give up. Her baby depended on her, and now, more than ever, she had to survive. After what seemed like an eternity, her feet finally touched something solid. The muddy riverbank offered little support, but it was her salvation. Rachel dragged herself out of the water, coughing and shivering, while Wolf remained at her side, equally exhausted but vigilant. It was then that she heard voices approaching. Her heart raced again. Were they Nathan's men? But the voices were different, concerned, not threatening. From the midst of the darkness emerged two figures, an elderly couple carrying a lantern that swayed in the storm. "Good Lord!" exclaimed the woman, running toward her. "Joe, come help, the lady is pregnant." The man, whom Rachel would later discover was named Joe, hurried to take off his coat to cover her. His calloused hands were gentle as he and his wife helped her stand. Wolf watched everything attentively, still in a protective position, but seeming to understand that these people were there to help. "Martha, we need to take her home," said Joe, his deep voice laden with concern. "She needs care, and quickly." Martha, the woman with graying hair and a kind face, was already taking off her own shawl to wrap Rachel. "Come, dear. Our house isn't much, but it's safe. Nobody will hurt you there." The path to the farmer's house was a confused mixture of stumbling steps and whispers of encouragement. Rachel barely registered where she was going, her body shaking uncontrollably while her mind tried to process everything that had happened. Wolf faithfully followed at her side, occasionally looking back, as if checking if they were being followed. The house was small but welcoming. The heat from a wood stove was the first thing Rachel felt upon entering. Martha immediately began to move about, getting towels and dry clothes while Joe lit more lanterns, illuminating the modest but clean environment. "You know him, don't you?" Joe asked softly, as Martha helped Rachel sit near the stove. "Nathan Bradford." Rachel nodded, unable to speak. His name sent chills down her spine, even there, apparently safe. "Everybody knows," continued Joe, exchanging a meaningful look with his wife. "And everybody knows what happened to his first wife. Only nobody ever had the courage to speak up." Martha returned with a cup of hot tea and some folded clothes. "Here, dear. They're simple clothes, but they're clean and dry. You need to change before you catch pneumonia." As Rachel drank the tea, her hands still trembling slightly, Martha and Joe told her what they knew. These weren't just rumors. They had witnessed, over the years, Nathan's pattern of behavior. The way he treated the staff, the veiled threats, the accidents that happened to those who dared to oppose him. "But this time will be different," said Martha firmly, her eyes shining with determination. "This time he won't get away with it. You're alive, dear, and while there's life, there's hope." Rachel touched her belly, feeling the baby move as if in agreement. Wolf, who had settled at her feet after being carefully dried by Martha, raised his head and licked her hand, offering silent comfort. However, the feeling of safety was brief. A distant sound of an engine made everyone freeze. Through the window, they could see beams of light cutting through the darkness, headlights of several cars approaching on the dirt road. The sound of the approaching engines made Martha act quickly. With surprising agility for her age, she turned off all the lights in the house, leaving only the faint glow from the wood stove. Joe, meanwhile, moved toward an old rug in the corner of the room, revealing a wooden trapdoor when he lifted it. "Quick," he whispered, lifting the heavy door. "This cellar was used during difficult times in the past. It will keep you safe now." Rachel didn't hesitate. With Martha's help, she descended the narrow steps, Wolf silently following behind her. The cellar was small but clean, with some boxes stacked in the corners and an old mattress against the wall. The smell of earth mingled with that of old wood. "Stay very quiet," instructed Martha, handing her a blanket. "No matter what you hear upstairs, don't make any noise." The trapdoor closed softly, and the rug was replaced. Rachel could hear the couple's footsteps moving above, trying to appear normal. Wolf positioned himself next to her on the mattress, his muscles tense, ears alert for any sound. It wasn't long before male voices could be heard from outside the house. Heavy footsteps on the wooden porch were followed by firm knocks at the door. Rachel held her breath, her heart pounding so hard she feared it might be heard through the floorboards. "Good evening," Joe's voice sounded casual, although Rachel could detect a slight tension. "How can I help you, gentlemen?" "We're looking for a woman," an unfamiliar voice replied. "Young, pregnant, might have passed by here in the last few hours." "A pregnant woman? In this storm?" Martha interjected, her voice carrying just the right amount of surprise and concern. "We haven't seen anyone, poor thing. It's very dark out there." Heavy footsteps echoed through the house. The men were entering. Rachel could distinguish at least 3 or 4 different people moving on the floor. Above, Wolf let out a low growl which she silenced with a gentle touch on his head. "Do you mind if we take a look?" the same voice asked, but it wasn't really a question. The sound of furniture being moved and doors being opened filled the environment. "Be my guest," replied Joe, keeping calm. "But as you can see, it's just the 2 of us here. We've lived alone for years." The minutes that followed seemed like an eternity. Rachel could hear every step, every object being moved, every door being opened and closed. Her baby moved restlessly, as if sensing her anxiety. She gently caressed her belly, trying to calm both the child and herself. "And this wet dog out." "Here?" another voice questioned. Rachel's heart froze. Had they found Wolf's paw prints? "Oh, that must be the stray that always shows up here when it rains," Martha responded promptly. "Poor thing, always wandering around the area. Sometimes we leave a bit of food for him." A few more minutes of searching followed, until footsteps began heading toward the exit. "If you see anything suspicious, or if anyone shows up asking for help, contact the Bradford estate immediately," the first voice ordered. "It's for your own good." Of course," Joe assured. "You can count on us." The sound of engines filled the air again, this time moving away. Even so, Rachel and her protectors waited long minutes before moving. Finally, the trapdoor was opened again, revealing the concerned faces of Joe and Martha. "They'll be back," said Joe, helping Rachel climb up. "We know Nathan well. He won't give up easily." Martha was already moving around the kitchen, preparing something for them to eat. "We need to think of a plan. You can't stay here forever, dear. It's not safe." Rachel sat at the simple table, observing the couple who risked everything to protect her. "Why are you helping me?" she finally asked. "You don't even know me." The couple exchanged a meaning-laden look before Martha answered, "Because 20 years ago, when Nathan's first wife needed help, nobody had the courage to do anything, and we've carried that weight to this day." Morning arrived, bringing a pale sun that could barely penetrate the remaining clouds from the storm. Martha prepared a simple breakfast in the kitchen, while Joe returned from his morning patrol of the property. Rachel, still wearing the clothes borrowed from Martha, absent-mindedly stroked Wolf's ears, who hadn't left her side since the night before. "Nathan's men are everywhere," Joe informed, hanging up his wet coat. "They've set up surveillance points. On the main roads, he must be furious." Martha placed a steaming cup in front of Rachel. "Drink, dear, you need to stay strong. The baby needs you strong." It was then that Joe took an old box from under the kitchen cabinet. The wood was worn by time, but still maintained an air of dignity. "I think it's time for you to meet Amy," he said, placing the box on the table. "Amy?" Rachel asked, her heart accelerating as she recognized the name of Nathan's first wife. "Yes," Martha sat beside her. "Amy was like a daughter to us. She worked in the area as a teacher before meeting Nathan. She was a cheerful girl, full of dreams." Joe opened the box, revealing dozens of letters, photographs, and a diary. "Amy began visiting us regularly after she married Nathan. At first they were happy visits, but over time we realized she was coming to seek refuge." Rachel picked up one of the photographs with trembling hands. It showed a beautiful young woman with dark hair and a gentle smile, sitting on the same porch bench where she had been the night before. Beside her, a dog very similar to Wolf rested. "Shadow," said Martha, noticing Rachel's gaze. "It was her dog. Wolf reminds me so much of him, always protecting, always alert." "What happened to Shadow?" Rachel asked, though she feared the answer. "He disappeared the same night as Amy," Joe replied, his voice laden with grief. He was the first to notice something was wrong with Nathan. He always growled when he got too close to Amy. Martha picked up one of the letters, her elderly hands trembling slightly. Amy began to document everything. Nathan's outbursts of anger, the veiled threats, the control he exercised over every aspect of her life. She knew she was in danger, but she couldn't simply leave. Why? Rachel asked, though she already suspected the answer. For the same reason you hesitated for so long, Joe answered softly. Nathan has power in this region, influence. People are afraid of him, and with reason. Martha opened the diary, leafing through until finding a specific page. This was the last entry she wrote. Read it. Rachel took the diary, Amy's words jumping from the page like a cry for help from the past. Dear Diary, today I found something I shouldn't have found. Documents in Nathan's office, records that prove the estate isn't just what it appears to be. There's something much bigger happening here, something dark. When I confronted him, I saw in his eyes something I had never seen before. It wasn't just anger, it was something deeper, more dangerous. Shadow hasn't stopped barking since then. He knows, just as I know, that this might be my last chance. Joe and Martha are the only ones I can trust. Tomorrow, when Nathan leaves for the meeting in town, I'm going to try. The entry ended abruptly. Rachel felt a shiver run down her spine. What happened next? Amy never made it here, Joe answered, his voice breaking. That night, there was a strong storm, like the one yesterday. The next morning, her car was found near the old bridge. The searches lasted weeks, but they never found anything. Wolf emitted a low whine as if sensing the sadness that filled the room. Rachel hugged the dog, seeking comfort in his presence. But you, Martha took Rachel's hands. Between hers, you managed to escape. You're alive. And more importantly, you have evidence. The letters you found at the estate, along with everything we've kept here. Finally, we can expose the truth. It won't be easy, warned Joe. Nathan has many powerful allies. The local police never properly investigated Amy's disappearance because he... A noise from outside interrupted the conversation. Wolf immediately took an alert position, a low growl escaping his throat. Through the kitchen window, they could see an unfamiliar pickup truck slowly approaching on the dirt road. Joe quickly collected the letters and photographs, returning them to the box, while Martha guided Rachel toward the cellar. But before they could reach the trapdoor, Wolf did something unexpected. Instead of growling threateningly, he wagged his tail and ran to the door. Wait, said Joe, observing through the window. It's Mike. Mike? Rachel asked, still tense. The sheriff of Oakridge, explained Martha, visibly relieved. The new sheriff. He arrived in town a few months ago. He's different from the others. A tall, middle-aged man got out of the pickup. His attentive eyes scanned the property before heading to the door. Joe opened it before he could even knock. Come in quickly, said Joe, looking around to make sure no one was watching them. You too, Thomas Laura. Two other occupants got out of the vehicle, a younger man carrying a folder and a professional-looking woman. Everyone entered the house quickly. Mrs. Rachel, Mike addressed her directly, his voice conveying a professional seriousness. I'm Sheriff Mike Reynolds. This is Prosecutor Thomas Bennett and Dr. Laura Wells from the State Public Defender's Office. Rachel felt a wave of hope mixed with apprehension. How did you find me? Joe contacted us last night, explained Laura, sitting at the kitchen table. He and Martha have been our informants for months. We've been building a case against Nathan Bradford. Actually, continued Thomas, opening his folder, your testimony might be the missing piece. We've been trying to gather sufficient evidence for years, but Nathan has always managed to evade justice. Mike approached the window, checking the road. We don't have much time. Nathan's men are everywhere, and they'll soon notice my absence in town. We need to act quickly. Martha placed the box with Amy's letters on the table. We have this too. We kept everything for years, waiting for the right moment. The prosecutor began examining the documents, his eyes widening as he read. This is much bigger than we imagined. These letters, along with the documents Mrs. Rachel found at the estate, prove that the estate is just a facade, completed Rachel, remembering the papers she had found. There's a much larger scheme behind it all. Exactly, confirmed Mike. Nathan Bradford built an empire based on appearances. The estate, the community's respect, all of it serves to cover up much darker activities. Laura took a laptop from her bag. Mrs. Rachel, we need to record your statement now. Every detail is important, from the moment you began to notice changes in his behavior to the events of last night. As Rachel related her story, Wolf remained at her side, occasionally touching his nose to her hand, as if wanting to give her strength. With each new detail revealed, the expressions of those present became more grave. That explains a lot, said Thomas, making notes. The mysterious disappearances, the convenient accidents, the properties he's been acquiring over the years. But we can't keep her here, interrupted Mike, his voice urgent. It's not safe. Nathan has people everywhere, and it's just a matter of time until... A distant sound of engines interrupted his speech. This time there were several vehicles approaching. Quick, ordered Mike, storing the documents. We have a safe location prepared, a protected house in another town. Thomas and Laura will take you there. What about Joe and Martha? Rachel asked, concerned about the couple who had risked everything to help her. They'll have to come too, answered Laura. It's no longer safe for them here. In fact, it never was. The sound of engines was closer now. Wolf began to growl, his fur bristling. We don't have much time, urged Mike, taking his radio. I'll try to delay them. You all leave through the back. There's a trail that leads to the secondary road. A car is waiting there. Rachel hugged Martha and Joe quickly, tears in her eyes. Thank you for everything. Go, whispered Martha, gently pushing her. Do what we couldn't do for Amy. End this once and for all. If this story interests you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give a like. Tell us which city you're watching from. We continue. The trail behind Joe and Martha's property wound between ancient trees, barely visible in the dawn. Light. Rachel followed Laura and Thomas with Wolf at the front, guiding the way as if he knew every stone, every route. Joe and Martha came right behind, carrying only a small suitcase with documents and some essential belongings. The sound of raised voices echoed in the distance. Mike was managing to delay the group that had arrived at the house. Rachel could hear Nathan's voice among them, his authoritative tone cutting through the morning air like a razor. This way, whispered Laura, diverting to an even narrower path. The car is waiting just beyond that curve. The walk, which under normal circumstances would take only a few minutes, seemed to stretch indefinitely. The baby moved restlessly in Rachel's belly, as if sensing the tension of the moment. Each branch breaking under her feet sounded like thunder in her alert ears. Finally, they reached a small clearing where a dark car with slightly tinted windows waited. A young man was at the wheel, eyes watchful on the rearview mirror. Marcus is trustworthy, assured Thomas, opening the back door. He's worked for the prosecutor's office for years. He'll take you to the safe location. Before they could enter the vehicle, Wolf emitted a low growl. His eyes were fixed on a point among the trees, ears up, his entire body tense. Someone's there, whispered Martha, grabbing Joe's arm. Laura took out a small flashlight, pointing it in the direction indicated by Wolf. For an instant, they could see the reflection of eyes in the darkness. Someone was watching them. Get in the car. Now, ordered Thomas, his voice urgent but controlled. But before they could move, a familiar voice cut through the silence of the woods. I knew you'd come this way. It was Victor, Nathan's foreman, a man Rachel had always feared for his blind loyalty to his boss. He emerged from the shadows, followed by two other men. His cold eyes surveyed the group, stopping on Rachel. The boss is very worried about you, Mrs. Rachel, he said, his voice falsely cordial. It's not good for a pregnant woman to go through so much stress. Thomas positioned himself between Victor and the group. She's under state protection now, Victor. Step aside. A cold smile formed on the foreman's lips. State protection. Here. In Oakridge we have our own law. And you know very well what it is. It was then that Wolf advanced, placing himself between Victor and Rachel, his teeth showing, a deep growl reverberating in his chest. The foreman took a step back, his hand instinctively moving to his belt. I wouldn't do that if I were you, Mike's voice sounded behind them. The sheriff emerged from another trail, accompanied by 2 police officers. Unless you want to add a few more charges to your record. Victor looked around, assessing the situation. His men seemed less confident now that they were outnumbered. The sergeant says, "Boss will know about this," he threatened, slowly backing away. "You can tell him," replied Mike. "Tell him his time is up. We have all the evidence we need now." When Victor and his men disappeared into the darkness, everyone released the breath they hadn't realized they were holding. Wolf kept his eyes fixed on the direction they had gone, still alert. "You need to go now," urged Mike. "Nathan will gather more men when he finds out he lost you here." Laura helped Rachel into the car, while Joe and Martha settled on the other side. Wolf jumped onto the front seat next to Marcus. "The documents," reminded Thomas, handing a folder to Laura. "Everything is here. Amy's letters, the estate records, your initial statement. Keep them safe." Rachel looked through the window last time, seeing Mike and the officers positioning themselves to cover their escape. The sheriff gave a brief nod, a silent promise that he wouldn't give up until justice was done. The car began to move, silently down the dirt road. Through the rearview mirror, Rachel saw the lights of Joe and Martha's property disappear in the distance. Ahead, the road stretched into the unknown, carrying with it the hope of a new beginning. "Where are we going?" she finally asked, her voice low in the car's silence. Laura held the folder with the documents firmly. "To a place where Nathan can't reach you. A town in the countryside where we have an established protection network. There we can prepare everything for what's to come." The journey lasted hours, with the car following secondary roads to avoid the main highways. The sun was already high when they finally arrived at a small town nestled between verdant mountains. Faded signs announced, "Welcome to Pine Valley." The vehicle traversed quiet streets until it reached a 2-story house, surrounded by a high wall and a well-maintained garden. An electronic gate opened silently, allowing their entry. In the yard, a woman of about 60 waited for them. "Ms. Eleanor," Laura introduced her as everyone got out of the car. "She coordinates our protection network in the region." Eleanor had a serene face that immediately conveyed confidence. Her eyes, however, carried an iron determination that Rachel recognized. It was the look of someone who had fought her own battles. "Welcome," she said, guiding the group inside the house. "You are safe here." The interior was cozy, with simple but comfortable furniture. Wolf sniffed the environment with interest, apparently approving the new territory. In the living room, a large table was covered with papers and a laptop. "Thomas." "Updated me by phone?" continued Eleanor, indicating that everyone should sit. "What you've discovered goes far beyond what we initially imagined." Laura opened the folder she carried, spreading the documents on the table. Amy's letters were just the beginning. What Rachel found at the estate completes a puzzle we've been assembling for years. "The Bradford estate," explained Eleanor, picking up some papers, "is just the visible tip of a much larger network. Nathan built an empire based on appearances, using his influence to control not just land but people." Joe and Martha exchanged significant looks. "That's why nobody could ever prove anything against him," said Joe. "He had people in all the right places." "Exactly," confirmed Laura. "But now we have something he didn't expect, a living witness, someone who can confirm not just recent events, but make the connection to the past." Rachel unconsciously touched her belly, feeling the baby move as if in agreement. "Amy, she discovered something in the office documents, didn't she? Something big enough for Nathan to—" "Yes," Eleanor completed softly. "Amy found records of suspicious transactions, names of influential people involved in questionable business. That's why she began documenting everything." Martha picked up one of Amy's letters, her eyes tearing up. "She knew she was in danger. That's why she sought us out that last night." "And now," said Laura, "we have not just her discoveries, but also the evidence Rachel found. Together, they form a solid case." Eleanor stood up, walking to a window. That overlooked the garden. "But Nathan won't give up easily. He'll use all the resources he has, all the contacts." As if to confirm her words, Laura's cell phone rang. It was a message from Mike. "Nathan is moving his pieces," she informed after reading. "He's already tried to activate some contacts in local politics. He's spreading a story about a mentally unstable wife who fled during a crisis. Rachel felt a tightness in her chest. It was exactly as Amy had described in her letters. The way Nathan manipulated the truth turned victims into villains. "But he made a mistake this time," said Eleanor, her voice carrying a quiet confidence. "He underestimated the power of truth. And, more importantly, he underestimated the strength of a woman fighting not just for her life but also for her child." Wolf, who had been lying at Rachel's feet, suddenly raised his head, his ears alert. A second later, they all heard it, the distant sound of a helicopter. "Don't worry," reassured Eleanor, noticing the tension that settled in the room. "It's just the regular state police patrol. In fact, that reminds me." She took her phone, dialing a number. "Richard? Yes, they arrived safely. Listen, I need you to activate that contact we discussed." "Yes, exactly. It's time to elevate the level of this investigation." Hanging up the phone, she turned to the group. "From tomorrow on, this case will no longer be just local. We're bringing in state and federal authorities. Nathan may have influence in Oak Ridge, but his power has limits." Rachel felt a wave of hope grow in her chest. For the first time since discovering the truth about Nathan, she felt she had a real chance at justice, not just for her and her baby, but also for Amy and all the other victims who had been silenced over the years. A week passed since their arrival in Pine Valley. Eleanor's house had transformed into an improvised operations center, with investigators and authorities constantly coming and going. Rachel observed everything from the second-floor veranda, Wolf always by her side, as she caressed her increasingly prominent belly. "Things are moving faster than we expected," said Laura, joining her on the veranda with a cup of tea. The presence of federal authorities caught Nathan by surprise. He's beginning to make mistakes. The afternoon sky was heavy, announcing another approaching storm. Rachel couldn't help but notice how the weather seemed to mirror the events. There was something forming on the horizon, something big and inevitable. "Mike called earlier," continued Laura. "Nathan is desperate. He started burning documents at the estate, but it's too late. We have copies of everything." In the garden below, Joe and Martha were talking with a group of investigators, probably sharing more details about the years they spent observing Nathan's activities. The couple had become a fundamental piece in the investigation, their memories filling crucial gaps in the case. "But there's something that worries me," Rachel said, her voice low. "Nathan has always been very careful, very controlled. This desperation, it doesn't seem like him." As if responding to her words, Eleanor appeared at the veranda door, her normally serene face now marked by concern. "We need to talk. All of us." In the living room, the investigators gathered around the large table, one of them, who introduced himself as Richard from the Federal Bureau of Investigation, took the floor. "We just received concerning information," he began, spreading some photos on the table. "Nathan isn't just burning documents, he's mobilizing people, many people." The photos showed suspicious movements at various properties connected to Nathan. Pickup trucks coming and going, groups of armed men, equipment being transported. "He's preparing something," continued Richard. "Our sources indicate he discovered your approximate location. Not the exact place, but he knows you're somewhere in this region." Wolf, who had been lying calmly at Rachel's feet, suddenly stood up, his ears alert. A second later, they all heard the distant sound of engines, many of them. "They're approaching the town," said Eleanor, checking her phone. "My contacts at the town entrance just warned me. At least 10 vehicles." "We need to get you out of here," said Laura, already beginning to collect the most important documents. "We have a contingency plan for this." But Rachel, surprising everyone, including herself, stood firm. "No, enough running." "Rachel," Martha began, concerned, "this is not the time to—" "I'm not being reckless," interrupted Rachel, her voice carrying a strength she didn't know she possessed. "Think about it. This is exactly what Nathan wants, to make us run, separate, just weaken the case. He's desperate because he knows this time is different. This time we have evidence, we have witnesses, we have federal support." Richard studied Rachel for a moment before slowly nodding. "She's right. If we flee now, we might lose everything we've built. Besides, He picked up his phone. "We already have reinforcements on the way. Tactical teams positioned at strategic points around the town. But we need to ensure everyone's safety," insisted Eleanor, "especially Rachel and the baby." It was then that Joe, who had been quiet until that moment, spoke up. "The old church." Everyone turned to him. "St. Benedict's Church on top of the hill," he explained. "It has an underground passage that connects the church to various parts of the town. It was used during the Gold Rush era to protect sacred relics. Very few people know of its existence." "How do you know about this?" asked one of the investigators. "My father was the sacristan there for 40 years, replied Joe. "He showed me the passages when I was a boy. They're safe, well built, and offer several escape routes if necessary." Eleanor was already on the phone again. "Richard, I need you to contact Father Anthony immediately. Yes, it's an emergency." The sound of engines was closer now. Wolf positioned himself near the window, his body tense, ready to act. "We have little time," said Richard. "Let's divide the teams. One group will go to the church to prepare the location, another stays here to coordinate with the tactical teams. We need to be ready for any scenario." Rachel approached the window, observing the first raindrops beginning to fall. The storm was coming, both in the sky and in her life. But this time she wasn't alone. This time she was prepared. The ancient St. Benedict's Church rose majestically on top of the hill, its twin towers piercing the heavy clouds that covered Pine Valley. The group had divided. Rachel, Joe, Martha, and part of the protection team were now inside the church, while the tactical teams positioned themselves strategically throughout the town. Father Anthony, a gentleman with white hair and gentle but determined eyes, guided them through the main nave to the sacristy. "The passages remain exactly as they were in the past," he explained, moving a heavy wooden confessional to reveal a metal door in the floor. "They were built to protect not just gold, but also people in danger." Wolf sniffed the air with interest. As the group descended a steep stone staircase, the tunnel was surprisingly spacious and well preserved, with several branches extending in different directions. "This map shows the entire network of tunnels," said Joe, unrolling an ancient parchment he had brought with him. "Each passage leads to a different point in the town. Some even reach beyond the town limits." Through the radio they carried, they could hear updates from the surveillance teams. Nathan's men had entered the town, dividing into smaller groups. That began to search every street, every alley. "They're being bolder than we expected," Richard's voice crackled on the radio. "They're heavily armed and don't seem to care about being seen." "That's because he has nothing left to lose," said Rachel, her voice echoing slightly off the stone walls. "Nathan knows that if he doesn't recover those documents, if he doesn't silence us, everything is over for him." Martha, who had been examining the map with Joe, approached Rachel. "There's something else. Something in the documents we found. There's an important date approaching." Laura, who was coordinating communications with the external teams, looked up from her papers. "What kind of date?" "A meeting," explained Martha. "Among Amy's letters, there was mention of a big meeting that happens every 5 years. Something related to Nathan's real business." "And this meeting," began Rachel, a sudden understanding appearing on her face. "Is tomorrow," completed Joe. "In the main hall of the Bradford estate." The group exchanged tense looks. If Nathan couldn't stop them today, his entire empire would crumble, not just from the evidence they had, but also from the exposure the meeting would bring. A sudden noise on the radio caught everyone's attention. It was Eleanor. "They found the house cue," her voice sounded urgent. "But they also found our surprise. The tactical teams are pushing them back, but—" Her voice was interrupted by sounds of confusion in the background. "Eleanor!" called Laura, concerned. "Eleanor, respond?" After a few tense seconds, her voice returned. "I'm fine. But you need to know. Victor isn't with the group. Repeat, Victor isn't with them." Wolf, who had been exploring the nearby tunnels, suddenly returned, a low growl escaping his throat. His eyes were fixed on one of the side passages. "He knows." "The tunnels," whispered Joe, a horrible realization in his voice. Victor grew up in this town. He must know. Before he could complete the sentence, the sound of footsteps echoed through one of the tunnels. These weren't the steps of a single person. They were multiple sets of boots approaching from different directions. "They're surrounding us," said Laura, drawing her weapon. "We need to move, now." Father Anthony pointed to one of the passages. "This one leads to the old mine. It's the longest and most complex. They'll have difficulty following us." But before they could move, a familiar voice echoed through the tunnels, making Rachel's blood freeze. "I always knew you'd return to the church, Joe." Victor's voice reverberated off the stone walls. "You and that habit of yours of protecting others. It was like that with Amy, wasn't it? And now with Rachel." Wolf positioned himself in front of the group, his teeth showing, while the footsteps approached ever closer. Rainwater was beginning to run down the tunnel walls, creating sounds that mixed with the echoes of the invaders. Rachel felt her baby move, as if it too sensed the danger. But this time the fear in her heart was different. It wasn't the paralyzing fear she had felt on the bridge, but something stronger, more determined. She was no longer alone. And now, in the depths of these historic tunnels, all the pieces of the puzzle finally fit together. It was time to face not just Victor and his men, but the entire system Nathan had built over the years. The echo of footsteps multiplied in the tunnels, making it impossible to determine exactly where the danger was coming from. The dampness of the stone walls seemed to amplify every sound, transforming the underground corridors into a chamber of whispers and threats. "Split up," Victor's voice echoed again. "They can't escape. The boss wants those documents and he wants the woman." Laura silently signaled to the group, indicating the passage that led to the old mine. With calculated movements, they began to move in the indicated direction. Wolf followed in, front, his paws silent on the damp stone guiding them through the darkness. "Joe," whispered Father Anthony, "there's an abandoned chapel at the end of this tunnel. If we can reach it—" A metallic noise interrupted his words, the unmistakable sound of a gate being closed somewhere in the tunnels. "They know the passages," murmured Joe. "They're blocking the exits." The group reached a fork. To the right, the tunnel continued toward the old mine. To the left, a narrower passage led to an unknown destination. Wolf stopped, intensely sniffing the air, his muscles tense. Suddenly, the dog emitted a low growl, looking intently at the passage to the right. Seconds later, the beam of a flashlight cut through the darkness in that direction. "This way," whispered Laura, guiding everyone to the passage on the left. The tunnel became increasingly narrow, forcing them to walk in single file. Rachel, who was following between Martha and Laura, felt something strange under her feet. The floor in that part of the tunnel seemed different, more irregular. Joe was the first to notice. "Stop," he whispered urgently. "This section, it's part of the old mining. The floor might be—" His warning came too late. A dull rumble echoed through the tunnel, and the floor beneath their feet began to give way. Martha managed to pull Rachel back in time, but Laura wasn't so lucky. The floor collapsed, revealing a deep pit. "Laura!" Rachel shouted, extending her hand, but the agent had already disappeared into the darkness below. The sound of the collapse immediately attracted the attention of the pursuers. Voices and hurried footsteps echoed through the tunnels, rapidly. "Approaching." "There they are," someone shouted, and flashlight beams illuminated the group. It was then that something unexpected happened. From the pit where Laura had fallen came the sound of laughter, a familiar laugh that made everyone's blood freeze. "You were always predictable, Victor," Laura's voice echoed, but there was something different about it. "Just like your boss." Light came on in the pit, revealing not an endless hole but a lower level of the tunnels. Laura was down there unharmed, and she wasn't alone. At her side, dozens of armed federal agents emerged from the shadows. "Impossible!" Victor exclaimed, his voice betraying panic for the first time. "No," replied Laura, her voice now firm and authoritative. "Not impossible, predictable. We knew these tunnels much better than you imagined, every passage, every trap. We were waiting for you." The sound of weapons being cocked echoed through all the tunnels. From the various passages, more federal agents appeared, completely surrounding Victor's group. "And there's more," continued Laura, climbing up a side ladder that no one had noticed before. "While you were down here, our teams have already taken the Bradford estate. That meeting that was supposed to happen tomorrow, it's not going to happen anymore. At least, not the way Nathan planned." Victor looked around, realizing he was completely surrounded. His men, one by one, began to lower their weapons. "Where is Nathan?" asked Rachel, stepping forward. Wolf remained at her side, still in a protective position. Victor let out a bitter laugh. "You think you've won, don't you? But you don't know. It's Nathan like I know him. He always has a plan B." As if answering his words, a new sound echoed through the tunnels. Heavy, determined footsteps, approaching. Wolf turned toward the sound, his growl more intense than ever. And then, emerging from the shadows like a ghost from the past, appeared Nathan Bradford. His eyes, normally cold and calculating, now burned with a barely contained fury. "Hello, dear," he said, his voice loaded with a false sweetness that made Rachel shudder. "I think we need to talk." The air in the tunnels grew even heavier with Nathan's arrival. He remained standing, seemingly oblivious to the officers surrounding him, his eyes fixed on Rachel. There was something different about his demeanor. No longer the mask of control he always maintained, but something more primitive, more dangerous. "Do you know what's most ironic?" he said, taking a step forward. "You ended up exactly like Amy, in the same place, making the same wrong choices." "No," replied Rachel, her voice firm. "The difference is that this time you won't be able to hide the truth." Nathan smiled, cold smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Truth? What truth? Your word against mine? A disturbed wife, running away with fantastic stories?" "It's not just her word," interrupted Laura, approaching with a folder. "It's documents, records, witnesses. It's the testimony of every person you hurt over the years, and especially—" she made a significant pause. "It's the recordings that Amy left." Nathan's smile faltered for the first time. "What recordings?" "The ones that were hidden in the abandoned chapel," replied Joe, his face illuminated by contained satisfaction. "Amy didn't just trust letters. She recorded everything, every conversation, every threat, every confession of yours about the illegal business." "Impossible," whispered Nathan, but there was a tremor in his voice. "I searched everywhere." "Not everywhere," said Martha. "Amy was smarter than you thought. She knew she needed evidence that would survive her. That's why she chose the one place you would never look, the chapel where you were married." Nathan's face contorted into a mask of fury. With a quick movement, he pulled out a gun, aiming it directly at Rachel. "None of this matters now. You won't—" But before he could finish the sentence, Wolf acted. In a fluid movement, the dog leaped, hitting Nathan's arm with enough force to make the gun fly from his hand. At the same instant, the officers advanced, immobilizing him against the tunnel wall. "Nathan Bradford," announced Laura, her voice echoing with official authority, "you are under arrest for the crimes of criminal association, active corruption, attempted murder." As the handcuffs closed around his wrists, Nathan kept his eyes fixed on Rachel, but she no longer saw fear in her own heart when facing him. She saw only a defeated man whose empire of lies was finally crumbling. The sun was already rising when the group emerged from the tunnels. The rain had stopped, leaving the air clean and fresh. In the square in front of the church, police vehicles and press cars were accumulating. The news of Nathan Bradford's arrest, one of the most powerful men in the region, was already spreading rapidly. Eleanor waited at the top of the church steps, a serene smile on her face. "It's over," she said simply, embracing Rachel. "No," replied Rachel, watching the first rays of sun tinting the sky pink. "It's just beginning." In the months that followed, the truth about Nathan's empire came to light. Amy's recordings, along with the evidence gathered by Rachel and the federal investigations, revealed a corruption network that extended across several towns. Former allies, fearing the consequences, began making plea deals. Joe and Martha returned to their property, now protected and monitored. Their house became a support point for other people who needed help escaping abusive situations. The couple could finally sleep in peace, knowing they had done for Rachel what they could not do for Amy. Rachel gave birth to a girl, who was named Amy in honor of the woman whose courage had paved the way for her own liberation. Little Amy would grow up hearing stories of bravery, loyalty, and justice, always under the watchful eye of Wolf, who had become not just a guardian, but a symbol that true love and loyalty can overcome even the darkest circumstances. On a quiet afternoon months later, Rachel was sitting on the porch of her new home watching her daughter play in the garden with Wolf. The dog, though older, maintained the same devotion and energy when it came to protecting his family. "You know," said Martha, who had come to visit her, "Amy always said that truth has a way of finding its path to the light." Rachel smiled, watching the last rays of sun of the day. And she was right, she always was.